She came to return his ring. The cold Duke sealed the door and said she would hear him out first. The carriage had not even come to a full stop when Evelyn Ashworth pushed the door open herself. Rain hit her face, cold and sharp, but she did not care. Her hand was closed tight around a small velvet box, and inside that box was the one thing she had promised herself she would never keep a moment longer than she had to. The ring. She had carried it for 6 months. 6 months of sleepless nights, of avoiding mirrors because she could not look at her own eyes without seeing that night again. 6 months of telling herself she was strong, that she had made the right choice, that walking away from Alistair Vane, Duke of Wraithmore, was the only thing a woman with any pride could do. Tonight, she would finish it. She would hand the ring back, say nothing more than she had to, and leave Blackthorn Manor forever. She climbed the stone steps quickly, her shoes slipping once on the wet stone, her heart pounding harder with every step. Lightning cracked somewhere far off, lighting the tall black windows of the manor for one bright second, before darkness swallowed them again. She raised her hand to knock, but the door opened before her knuckles ever touched the wood. He was standing there. Not a servant, not a housekeeper sent to receive an unexpected guest. Alistair himself, tall and still, dressed as though he had been expecting someone, though she knew he could not have known she was coming. His eyes found hers immediately, and for one terrible second, neither of them said a single word. He looked exactly as she remembered. Exactly as she had tried so hard to forget. The same sharp jaw, the same dark eyes that gave nothing away, the same quiet control in the way he held himself, as though the whole world could be burning down around him, and he would still stand there, calm, untouched. "Evelyn," he said. Just her name. Nothing more. She lifted her chin, refusing to let her voice shake. "I have come to return this." She held out the small velvet box, not stepping any closer to him, keeping the distance between them like a wall she had built with her own 2 hands. "I should have sent it back sooner. I apologize for the delay. Please take it, and I will trouble you no further." He did not move to take it. Instead, his gaze dropped to the box for only a moment, before returning to her face, studying her the way he used to study a difficult letter, searching for something hidden beneath the surface. "Come inside," he said. "You are soaked through, and the storm is only getting worse." "I did not come to stay. I came to return your ring, and I intend to leave immediately after." "You will leave when I am finished speaking, and not one moment before," he said, and though his voice was calm, there was something underneath it now, something that had not been there in his greeting. Not quite anger, something closer to determination. "Come inside, Evelyn. I will not ask you again." Every instinct told her to turn, to walk back down those steps, and climb into her carriage, and never look back. But her carriage driver had already pulled away to the stables, seeking shelter from the storm, and the rain was falling harder now, and some small, foolish part of her wanted to know what he could possibly still have to say to her after all this time. The great hall of Blackthorn Manor was just as grand as she remembered, all dark wood and high ceilings, and candlelight that flickered against old family portraits. She had once imagined herself living in this house, filling its cold corners with warmth, with laughter, with the sound of children running down its long halls. That dream had died the night she learned the truth about him, or what she had believed to be the truth. She heard the door close behind her, heavy, final. Then she heard something else, a sound she did not expect. The unmistakable click of a lock turning. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. "What are you doing?" Alistair stood by the door, his hand still resting against the heavy iron bolt he had just thrown into place. His expression had not changed, still calm, still controlled, but there was something new in his eyes now, something that looked almost like relief, as though he had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment, and could not quite believe it had finally come. "I am ensuring you do not leave this house until you have heard everything I have to say," he said simply. "You left me once without giving me the chance to explain myself. I will not allow that to happen again." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. Fear and anger tangled together inside her chest, and for a moment she could not tell which one was winning. "You cannot keep me here. This is unlawful. You have no right." "I have every right in my own house," he said, "and I promise you, Evelyn, no harm will come to you here. You have my word. But you will hear me out, and only then will these doors open again." "Your word," she repeated, and the bitterness in her own voice surprised even her. You expect me to trust your word, after everything? Something flickered across his face at that, quick and sharp, like pain trying to hide itself behind pride. Yes, he said quietly. I do expect it. Because whatever you believe of me, I have never once lied to you. Not once, Evelyn. Not even the night you left. She wanted to argue. She wanted to throw the velvet box at his feet, the way she had thrown it once before, and storm past him, toward the door. Lock or no lock, storm or no storm. But something in the way he said it, quiet and certain, without any trace of the coldness people always spoke of when they described the Duke of Wraithmore, made her hesitate. You sealed the door, she said instead, her voice quieter now, though no less firm. As though I am your prisoner. You are my guest, he corrected. One who has, until tonight, refused every letter I have sent, every message, every attempt I have made to speak with you, since the day you left. I did not want it to come to this. But I find I have run out of other options. Her eyes narrowed. Letters? What letters? I received nothing from you after that night. For the first time since she had arrived, something like surprise crossed his features, quickly hidden again beneath his usual composure. I sent you 7 letters, Evelyn, the first within a week of your departure. I sent them to your family's house in the city, exactly as you had instructed me to write to you, should the need ever arise. I never received a single one. They stared at each other across the wide stone floor, the silence between them suddenly heavy with a question neither of them could yet answer. If he had truly sent them, then where had they gone? And if he was lying about sending them at all, then why did his voice sound so certain, so free of the practiced smoothness of a man telling a well-rehearsed lie? Come, he said finally, gesturing toward a room just off the main hall, where firelight glowed warm and steady through the open door. Sit by the fire. Dry yourself. I will have tea brought, and then, if you are willing, I will tell you everything, from the very beginning. And if I am not willing? Then you may sit in silence until you are, he said, and for just a moment, the faintest hint of something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. But I do not think you have ever been a woman who enjoys silence when there are questions left unanswered. I remember that much about you, at least. She hated that he was right. Against every instinct screaming at her to refuse, to demand he unlock the door immediately, she found herself walking toward the fire, her wet cloak dripping softly onto the polished floor with each step. She told herself it was only practical. She was cold, and the storm outside showed no sign of ending soon, and there was nowhere else for her to go until it passed. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way her heart still ached, quietly, stubbornly, every single time she heard him say her name. The room he led her to was smaller than the great hall, more intimate, with a fire crackling in a stone hearth, and 2 chairs set close together, as though arranged that way on purpose. A tea service already sat waiting on a low table between them, steam still rising gently from the pot, as though it had been prepared only moments before she arrived. You were expecting me, she said, eyeing the tea with suspicion. I have had a room prepared and tea ready every evening for the past 2 weeks, he admitted, taking the seat across from her, his posture straight, his hands folded calmly in his lap. I received word from a mutual friend that you had finally decided to return the ring in person, rather than by post, as you had done with everything else. I did not know which night you would come. I only knew I intended to be ready when you did. She stared at him, trying to find some crack in his calm exterior, some sign that this was all some kind of performance, a trick to soften her before delivering some final cruelty. But all she saw was a tired man, older somehow than the last time she had seen him, though it had been only half a year, with shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of nights spent awake, much as her own had been. Why does it matter so much to you? She asked quietly. Why not simply let me return the ring by post, as I intended, and let this be finished between us? Alistair was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire rather than her face, as though gathering the courage to say something he had waited a very long time to say. Because I have spent 6 months believing you left me for a reason that was never true, he said finally. And I would rather live with your anger, your hatred even, if that is what remains after tonight, than live one more day, letting you believe a lie about the kind of man I am. The velvet box sat forgotten in her lap now, her fingers no longer gripping it as tightly as before. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the tall windows, thunder rolling low across the hills surrounding Blackthorn Manor. But inside this small, warm room, something had shifted, some old wall beginning, however slightly, to crack. "Then speak," she said softly. "I am listening." And so, with the fire casting long shadows across the walls, and the rain falling steady outside, Alistair Vane, the Duke known throughout the county for his coldness, his silence, his refusal to explain himself to anyone, finally began to tell Evelyn Ashworth the truth he had been carrying alone since the night she left him standing in this very house, a ring forgotten on the floor between them. "It begins," he said, "with my sister." Evelyn blinked, startled. "Your sister? I did not know you had a sister." "Very few people do," he said quietly. "And that, Evelyn, is precisely where this story begins." The fire popped softly in the hearth as Alistair leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed somewhere in the middle distance, as though looking not at the room around him, but at a memory only he could see. "Her name is Charlotte," he said. "She is younger than me by 11 years. Our father kept her existence quiet, for reasons that made sense to no one but himself. Some old fear about the family name, about scandal, about a mother who died giving birth to a daughter he never quite forgave for surviving when his wife did not. Charlotte grew up in a small house on the edge of our northern estate, raised by a governess, visited only rarely, by me, never by him." Evelyn said nothing, but she was listening now with her full attention, the velvet box forgotten entirely in her lap. "When our father died 3 years ago, I inherited the title, and with it, the responsibility of a sister the world did not know existed. I could have continued hiding her away, as he did. It would have been easier, safer, in the eyes of society. But I could not do that to her. I brought her to London under a different name, gave her the education, and the comforts she had been denied her entire life, and hoped, foolishly perhaps, that no one would ever need to know the truth." "Why does this matter to what happened between us?" Evelyn asked, though her voice had softened, curiosity beginning to outweigh her guarded anger. "Because 8 months ago, Charlotte fell in with a man who did not love her the way he claimed to. His name was Edmund Price, a gambler with more debts than sense, and when he learned who she truly was, when he learned that the quiet young woman he had been courting was in fact sister to the Duke of Wraithmore, he saw only opportunity. He threatened to expose her, to tell all of London that the Duke had a hidden, illegitimate sibling, unless I paid him a considerable sum to keep his silence." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. "That is why you were meeting him, the night I saw you." Alistair nodded slowly. "I did not want to pay him. Blackmail only grows hungrier the more it is fed, but Charlotte begged me. She was terrified, not for herself, but for what the scandal would do to me, to the family, to everything our father had spent his life protecting, however cruelly. So I agreed to meet with Price, to negotiate, to buy time while I searched for another way to protect her, without giving in to his demands entirely. The letter," Evelyn said quietly, "the one I found, was from Charlotte," Alistair confirmed, "begging me to meet Price quietly, without telling anyone, especially not you, because she feared that if word spread even to my closest circle, it would only increase the danger of exposure. I know now how foolish that secrecy was. I know now what it cost me. But at the time, I believed I was protecting the two people I loved most in this world, you and her, by keeping you both entirely separate from a danger that was mine alone to face." Evelyn sat back slowly in her chair, her mind spinning backward through the memory she had carried for 6 months, replaying it now with entirely new information layered over the old. The hushed voices she had overheard, the woman's shape she had glimpsed through a rain-streaked window, cloaked and hooded, meeting Alistair in a quiet corner of a garden late at night. The way he had refused, when she confronted him the next morning, to explain where he had been or who he had met. "You would not tell me anything," she said, her voice rising slightly, old hurt bleeding back into her words. "I asked you directly, Alistair. I gave you every chance to explain, and you simply stood there and said nothing at all. What was I supposed to think, faced with silence like that?" "I know," he said, and for the first time since she had arrived, real regret cracked through his composed exterior. I know what my silence cost us both. I told myself I was protecting Charlotte's secret, protecting her from a scandal that could ruin whatever chance she had at a decent life. But the truth, Evelyn, the truth I have only fully understood these past 6 months, is that I was also protecting myself. Protecting yourself from what? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its usual careful control, replaced instead by something raw and unguarded, something she had never once heard from him in all the months they had known each other. From being seen as weak, he admitted. From admitting that my own family carried secrets, that my father's cruelty had left wounds, even I did not fully understand, until Charlotte came to me in tears, begging for help. I have spent my entire life being called cold, Evelyn. The cold Duke, they whisper, at every ball, every dinner, every gathering I am forced to attend. I built that coldness deliberately, brick by brick, because it was easier than letting anyone close enough to see how much I was still carrying from my father's house. And when the moment came that I most needed to be honest with you, I found I did not know how. Evelyn's throat tightened unexpectedly, tears she had not expected rising hot and sudden behind her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to let him see just how deeply his words had struck something she had buried just as deeply within herself. You let me believe you had betrayed me, she said quietly. You let me carry that belief for 6 months, when a single sentence, a single explanation, could have spared us both. I know, he said again, and this time his voice nearly broke on the word. I have relived that morning 1,000 times since you left, Evelyn. Every version of it ends the same way, with me finding my voice too late, with you already gone, the ring left behind on the floor where you dropped it. I wrote to you as soon as I understood what my silence had cost. I wrote 7 times. And I do not know why my letters never reached you, but I promise you, on everything I hold sacred, that I tried. Evelyn stood suddenly, unable to remain still any longer, and walked toward the tall window at the far end of the room, watching the rain streak down the dark glass, her own reflection ghostly and faint against the storm beyond it. Behind her, she heard Alistair rise as well, though he did not follow, giving her the space she so clearly needed. If what you say is true, she said slowly, not turning to face him, then someone intercepted those letters. Someone who did not want me to learn the truth. Yes, Alistair said, that is precisely what I believe happened, and I believe I know who. She turned then, startled by the certainty in his voice. Who? Your cousin, he said quietly. Gregory Ashworth. Evelyn's breath caught. Gregory had always disliked Alistair, had made no secret of his belief that Evelyn deserved a husband from a family with, in his words, cleaner history, one untouched by the whispers that had always followed the Vane name. But surely even Gregory would not have gone so far as to hide letters meant for her, to let her believe a lie, for 6 long months out of nothing more than personal dislike. That is a serious accusation, she said carefully. It is, Alistair agreed. Which is precisely why I did not make it lightly, and precisely why I intend to prove it to you tonight, rather than simply asking you to take my word alone. He crossed the room to a small writing desk near the window, opening a drawer and withdrawing a thin stack of papers, worn soft at the edges from handling, clearly read and reread many times over the past months. He held them out to her. These are copies of the letters I sent you, he said. I kept drafts of each one. Foolish habit of a man who has spent too many years dealing with lawyers and correspondence. He did not trust others to remember accurately. Read them, if you are willing. Every word in them is true, and every word was meant only for you. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she took the papers from him, the weight of them somehow heavier than mere parchment should be. She did not open them immediately, holding them instead against her chest, her eyes searching his face for any final trace of deception, any sign that this entire evening was some elaborate performance, designed only to win back what pride alone could not. She found none. Why did Gregory hide them? She asked instead, though some cold, sinking feeling in her stomach already suspected the answer before Alistair spoke it aloud. Because your cousin, Alistair said slowly, has spent the past year attempting to arrange a match between you and Lord Ellis Whitmore, a man whose family fortune would restore Gregory's own failing finances, should such a marriage take place. I do not believe he acted purely out of spite toward me, Evelyn. I believe he acted out of far more practical, far more selfish motives, and I believe you deserve to know the full truth of that as well." The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as Evelyn sank slowly back into her chair, the letters still clutched tightly in her hands, her entire understanding of the past 6 months beginning to shift and reshape itself into something she was not yet certain she had the strength to fully accept. "I need to read these," she said quietly. "Alone, if you would allow it." Alistair inclined his head. "Of course. Take whatever time you need. I will not disturb you until you are ready." He moved toward the door, and though she knew the lock had already been thrown, though she knew she remained, technically, a prisoner within these walls until the storm outside finally passed and the truth between them finally settled, Evelyn found, to her own quiet surprise, that she no longer felt any particular urgency to leave. Not yet, not until she understood everything. She read each letter slowly, by the light of the fire, while Alistair waited in the great hall beyond, giving her the privacy she had asked for. The first letter was dated only 4 days after she had left, the handwriting slightly uneven, as though written in haste, or perhaps written by a hand that was not entirely steady. He had written of Charlotte, of Edmund Price and his threats, of the meeting in the garden that she had witnessed from a distance and so completely misunderstood. He had written, too, of his own failure, his own cowardice, in not simply telling her the truth the moment she asked, rather than standing there in silence and letting her walk away believing the very worst of him. The second letter, written 2 weeks later, was more desperate. He wrote that he had gone to her family's townhouse himself, only to be told by a servant that she was not receiving visitors, that she wished no further contact with the Duke of Wraithmore under any circumstances. He had left that letter with the servant directly, watched it placed into what he believed to be trustworthy hands, and returned home believing, wrongly, that it would eventually reach her. By the 5th letter, his tone had shifted again, quieter now, resigned, though never entirely without hope. He wrote that he understood if she never wished to see him again, that he would not blame her for choosing peace over a life tangled up with secrets and misunderstandings. But he wrote, too, that he would keep the ring safe, should she ever wish to return it herself, and that whatever she decided, he wanted her to know the truth of that night, even if the truth changed nothing between them. The 7th and final letter was the shortest of all. "I have run out of words to convince you of what silence has already ruined. I will not write again unless you ask me to. But know this, Evelyn, I loved you honestly, even when I explained myself poorly. That much has never once been in question." Evelyn set the letters down slowly in her lap, her vision blurred with tears she no longer had the strength to hold back. 6 months. 6 months she had spent building a wall of anger around a wound that had never healed properly, because it had never had the chance to heal at all, hidden beneath a lie she had believed without ever meaning to. She thought of Gregory, of the visits he had made to her family's townhouse in the weeks after she left Alistair, always so quick to comfort her, always so ready with soft words about how much better off she was, without a man who could not even be honest with her. She thought of how often he had mentioned Lord Whitmore in those same conversations, casually at first, then with growing insistence as the months wore on. She had thought it was simply concern. She had never once imagined it might be calculation. The door to the room opened quietly, and Alistair stepped back inside, his eyes immediately finding hers, searching her face for some sign of what she now believed. "You were telling the truth," she said softly, before he could ask. "All of it." "Yes," he said simply. "And Gregory kept these from me. Kept every single one, for 6 months, while I sat in my room believing you had betrayed me, and never once looked back." Alistair crossed the room slowly, taking the chair across from her once more, though he did not reach for her, did not attempt to close the distance between them, beyond what was necessary. "I believe so, yes. Though I have no proof beyond the fact that my letters were delivered directly into the hands of your household staff, and none of them ever reached you." "I want proof," Evelyn said, and there was steel in her voice now, the same steel that had once made her walk away from him without a backward glance, only now aimed at an entirely different target. "If Gregory did this, I want it proven beyond any doubt. I will not simply take your word against his, without something more solid to stand upon." "That is fair," Alistair said, and something in his expression, some quiet flicker of admiration, told her he had expected nothing less from her. "I have already begun making inquiries, One of my men has spoken quietly with a member of your household staff, a young woman named Grace, who has expressed some willingness to speak the truth of what she witnessed, provided she is protected from any consequence for doing so. Grace, Evelyn repeated, her mind immediately picturing the quiet young maid who had served in her family's house for nearly 2 years now. Always polite, always careful, always somehow present in the background of every important conversation, without ever seeming to intrude upon it. She would have seen the letters arrive. She claims she did, Alistair said, and she claims Gregory intercepted each one personally, instructing the staff never to mention their arrival to you directly. I have not yet spoken with her myself. I wish to wait until I had first spoken with you, in case you preferred to hear this news from someone within your own household rather than from me. Evelyn stood again, pacing now, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just learned. If Gregory had truly done this, deliberately kept her from the truth for reasons of his own financial gain, then the betrayal she had spent 6 months mourning was never Alistair's at all. It belonged instead to a man she had trusted her entire life, a cousin who had grown up alongside her, who had always claimed to care for her welfare above all else. I need to speak with Grace myself, she said finally, and I need to speak with Gregory. He must answer for this directly, to my face, where he cannot hide behind carefully chosen words, the way he has clearly grown accustomed to doing. I agree entirely, Alistair said, though I would ask that you allow me to accompany you when that conversation takes place, not because I doubt your ability to handle him yourself, but because I have my own questions for your cousin, questions concerning exactly how far his interference extended, and whether Lord Whitmore was aware of any part of it. Evelyn paused, turning to look at him fully, for what felt like the first time since she had entered this house. The anger that had carried her through the storm and up the stone steps of Blackthorn Manor had not entirely disappeared, but it had changed shape now, redirected toward a different target entirely, leaving something else behind in its place, something softer, something that felt dangerously close to the affection she had once carried for this man, before 6 months of silence and misunderstanding had buried it beneath so much hurt. Why did you not simply come to me yourself, months ago, and tell me all of this directly, rather than relying on letters that might never arrive? She asked. You are a duke, Alistair. You could have appeared at my family's townhouse at any hour of the day and demanded to be heard, regardless of what any servant told you. He was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully before answering. I considered it, more than once in fact, but I did not wish to force myself upon you, Evelyn, not after everything. I told myself that if you truly wished to hear from me, you would eventually respond to at least one of my letters. When you did not, I convinced myself that perhaps this silence was your answer, that perhaps forcing my way back into your life would only cause you further pain. And tonight? She asked. What changed tonight? That you would seal the very doors of your own house, rather than simply let me leave the ring and go? His eyes met hers directly then, steady and unflinching, carrying none of the coldness that had earned him his reputation throughout the county, carrying instead something far more honest, far more vulnerable than she had ever seen from him before. Tonight, I realized this might be my very last chance, he said simply, and I found I was no longer willing to let pride, or fear, or the habit of silence cost me the one person I have ever truly wished to spend my life beside. Whatever you decide after tonight, Evelyn, I needed you to at least know the truth. I owed you that much, 6 months ago and now. The fire crackled softly between them, and outside, the storm had begun, at last, to quiet, the heavy rain softening into something gentler, though it showed no sign of stopping entirely. Evelyn looked down at the letters still resting in her lap, 7 pieces of paper that had somehow managed to carry 6 months of unspoken truth across a silence neither of them had ever intended to create. I will speak with Grace tonight, she said finally. And tomorrow, once the storm has passed, we will speak with Gregory together. Something in Alistair's shoulders eased slightly at her words, some tension he had clearly been carrying since the moment she first arrived at his door. Thank you, he said quietly, for staying long enough to hear the truth, even when every reasonable part of you had every right to walk away. Do not thank me yet, Evelyn said, though there was no longer any real coldness in her voice. I have not yet decided what I believe about us, Alistair. Only about what happened 6 months ago. Those are not, I think, quite the same question. No, he agreed, a faint, tired smile touching his lips for the first time that evening. I do not suppose they are. But I am willing to wait, Evelyn, for however long it takes you to answer the second question honestly. I have already waited 6 months. I find I have grown rather good at patience, where you are concerned. She almost smiled at that herself, though she caught it before it fully formed, unwilling yet to give him quite so much ground in a single evening. But as she rose to follow him toward the servants' quarters, where Grace was waiting to tell her own part of this long, tangled truth, Evelyn found that the walls she had built so carefully around her heart these past 6 months had begun, however slowly, however cautiously, to come down. Grace was waiting in a small sitting room near the kitchens, her hands twisted nervously in her apron, her eyes widening with a mixture of surprise and fear the moment Evelyn walked through the door. She rose quickly, dropping into a curtsy so deep it seemed almost desperate, as though she believed she might be dismissed on the spot for whatever she was about to confess. "Miss Ashworth," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I did not expect to see you here tonight. I only spoke with the Duke's man because he promised I would not lose my position for telling the truth, and I have carried this weight long enough that I could not continue staying silent, whatever the cost to myself." "Sit down, Grace," Evelyn said gently, taking the chair across from her, while Alistair remained standing near the door, allowing the two women space to speak, without his presence looming too heavily over the conversation. "I am not here to punish you. I am here because I need to understand exactly what happened these past 6 months, and I believe you may be the only person who can tell me the full truth of it." Grace sat slowly, still visibly shaken, her hands gripping each other tightly in her lap. "It started about a week after you returned from Blackthorn Manor, that final time," she began. "A letter arrived, addressed to you, and I brought it directly to your room, as I always did. But your cousin, Mr. Ashworth, intercepted me in the hallway before I could deliver it. He told me he would see that it reached you himself, and I thought nothing of it at the time. He is family, after all. I had no reason to doubt him." "And the letters that followed?" Evelyn asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The same, every time," Grace said, her voice growing steadier now that the first confession had been made. 6 more letters over the following months, each one intercepted the same way, always before they could reach your hands. By the 3rd letter, I began to grow suspicious, but Mr. Ashworth made it very clear that my position in this household depended on my silence regarding the matter. "I am sorry, miss. I should have found some way to tell you sooner. I was simply frightened of what might happen to me if I did not obey him." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest, a betrayal that cut differently than the one she had believed she suffered these past 6 months, because this one came not from a man she had only recently begun to love, but from a cousin she had trusted her entire life, someone who had grown up alongside her, who had attended every family gathering, every celebration, every quiet dinner where trust had been built slowly over years rather than months. "Do you know why he did this?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Did he ever explain his reasons to you directly?" Grace hesitated, glancing briefly toward Alistair before returning her attention to Evelyn. "I overheard him once, speaking with Lord Whitmore in the study, though I do not believe either of them realized I was still in the room, dusting the shelves near the door. Mr. Ashworth spoke of an arrangement between their families, something about debts owed by your family's estate that Lord Whitmore's fortune could resolve, should a marriage between yourself and his lordship take place. He seemed very determined that nothing should interfere with that arrangement, including, I believe, any letters from the Duke that might rekindle your affection for him." The room fell silent for a long moment, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire and the distant patter of rain against the windows, quieter now than it had been earlier in the evening, though still steady enough to remind them all that the storm had not yet fully passed. "I am sorry, Miss Ashworth," Grace said again, tears now gathering visibly in her eyes. "I know I should have told you sooner. I know my silence caused you a great deal of pain. Pain I could have prevented, had I simply found the courage to speak up months ago, regardless of the consequences to myself." Evelyn reached out, taking the young woman's trembling hands in her own, a gesture that seemed to surprise Grace as much as it surprised Evelyn herself. "You were frightened, and my cousin took advantage of that fear to serve his own purposes. Whatever mistakes you made in staying silent, the true fault lies with him, not with you. I promise you, Grace, you will not lose your position over this. If anything, you have my gratitude for finally telling me the truth, however difficult that must have been." Grace nodded gratefully. wiping quickly at her eyes with the edge of her apron, though her shoulders visibly relaxed for the first time since Evelyn had entered the room. "Thank you, miss. I only hope you can forgive me, in time, for staying quiet as long as I did." "There is nothing to forgive," Evelyn said firmly. "You have given me something far more valuable tonight than an apology. You have given me the truth." After Grace had gone, excused with quiet thanks and a promise that no harm would come to her for her honesty, Evelyn remained seated in the small sitting room for several long minutes, staring into the low fire burning in the modest hearth, her thoughts churning with everything she had learned in the span of a single evening. Alistair remained near the door, giving her the silence she needed, though she could feel his eyes on her, patient and watchful, waiting for whatever she might say next. "He knew," she said finally, her voice quiet, but edged with something sharp and cold. "Gregory knew exactly what he was doing, every single time he intercepted one of your letters. This was not some misguided attempt to protect me from further heartbreak, as I might have almost believed had it happened only once. This was calculated, deliberate, repeated 7 times over the course of 6 months, all so that he could arrange a marriage that would benefit his own finances at the direct cost of my happiness." "I am sorry, Evelyn," Alistair said quietly. "I know how much trust you placed in your cousin. Learning the truth of this must be its own particular kind of pain, separate from anything that happened between the two of us." She looked up at him then, something fierce and determined burning behind her eyes now, replacing the raw vulnerability that had marked so much of their conversation earlier in the evening. "I want to confront him tonight," she said. "Not tomorrow, once the storm has passed, and I have had time to grow calm and reasonable about all of this. Tonight, while the anger is still fresh enough that I will not let him talk his way out of what he has done." Alistair studied her for a long moment, and she half expected him to argue, to suggest caution, to counsel patience, the way he had counseled patience with himself for 6 long months, while he waited for her to respond to his letters. Instead, he simply nodded. "Then we will go tonight," he said. "Together, if you will allow it. The storm has quieted enough that the roads should be passable, and I have no intention of letting you face your cousin alone, not after everything he has done to keep the two of us apart." "You do not need to protect me from Gregory," Evelyn said, though there was no real sharpness in her tone now, only a kind of tired gratitude that she did not quite know how to express more directly. "I am fully capable of confronting my own cousin." "I have no doubt of that," Alistair said, and there was something almost like admiration in his voice as he said it. "But I have my own questions for him as well, Evelyn. He has cost me 6 months of the life I wished to build with you, and I find I am no longer willing to let that debt go unanswered, simply because confronting him directly might prove uncomfortable for either of us." Evelyn rose slowly from her chair, smoothing the front of her dress, some of the earlier fatigue from the long carriage ride and the emotional weight of the evening beginning to show plainly on her face, though her eyes remained sharp, focused, entirely certain of what she intended to do next. "Very well," she said. "Together then, but I will speak first. Whatever questions you have for him, Alistair, they will wait until I have said everything I need to say to my cousin myself." "Understood," Alistair said, and there was no argument in his voice, only quiet respect for the strength she was showing, strength he had clearly admired in her from the very beginning of their acquaintance, long before either of them had ever imagined their story might take such a difficult turn. As they made their way toward the front hall, where Alistair called for a carriage to be readied despite the late hour and the still falling rain, Evelyn found herself walking a half-step closer to him than strict propriety might have called for, close enough that their hands nearly brushed together as they moved. Neither of them commented on it, neither of them pulled away. Some walls, it seemed, once cracked, did not rebuild themselves quite so easily as they had first been constructed. The carriage ride to Gregory's townhouse felt longer than it truly was, the city streets slick and dark beneath the last thin traces of the storm, gas lamps casting pale halos of light through the drizzle that continued to fall. Evelyn sat rigid against the carriage seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, rehearsing the words she intended to say the moment she saw her cousin's face again. Across from her, Alistair remained quiet, watching her with an expression that carried none of the coldness the county gossips so loved to whisper about, only a steady, careful patience, as though he understood this particular battle belonged first and foremost to her, and he was simply there to stand at her side when she needed him. You do not have to come inside, she said finally, breaking the silence as the carriage slowed before a modest townhouse near the edge of the fashionable district, its windows dark, save for one, glowing faintly on the upper floor. I intend to, Alistair said simply, unless you tell me directly that you wish me to remain here instead. Evelyn considered this for a long moment, then shook her head slightly. No, come. I think, after everything, you have earned the right to hear whatever he has to say for himself. They climbed down from the carriage together, the rain now little more than a fine mist against their faces, and approached the front door. Evelyn knocked firmly, 3 sharp raps that echoed loudly in the quiet street, and after several long moments, a sleepy footman opened the door, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of his mistress's cousin standing on the step at such a late hour, accompanied by a man he clearly recognized as the Duke of Wraithmore. Miss Ashworth, the footman stammered. Mr. Ashworth has already retired for the evening. Shall I wake him? Yes, Evelyn said firmly. Immediately, please. Tell him his cousin is here, and that the matter cannot wait until morning. The footman disappeared up the staircase, and several minutes later, Gregory Ashworth appeared at the top of the stairs, tying the belt of his dressing gown with visible irritation, his expression shifting quickly from annoyance to wary surprise the moment he spotted Alistair standing just behind Evelyn in the entrance hall. Evelyn, he said carefully, descending the stairs slowly. What is the meaning of this? And why on earth have you brought the Duke of Wraithmore to my door at this hour? I think you know exactly why, Evelyn said, and her voice carried none of the warmth she had always reserved for her cousin in the past, replaced now with something cold and unyielding that seemed to catch Gregory entirely off guard. I spoke with Grace tonight, Gregory. She has told me everything about the letters. For a brief moment, something flickered across Gregory's face, quick and unmistakable, the look of a man caught in a lie he had believed thoroughly buried. He recovered quickly, however, arranging his features into something resembling wounded confusion. I do not know what you mean. What letters? Do not, Evelyn said sharply, insult me further by pretending ignorance. The Duke sent me 7 letters over the past 6 months, each one addressed directly to me, each one intercepted by you before they ever reached my hands. Grace has confirmed this herself, and I have no reason to doubt her word over yours, not after tonight. Gregory's composure cracked further, his eyes darting briefly toward Alistair before returning to Evelyn's face, searching perhaps for some way to salvage the situation, some explanation that might soften what he had clearly hoped would remain buried forever. Evelyn, please, you must understand, I only wish to protect you. That man broke your heart, and I could not bear to watch you suffer through more letters, more false promises, when you had already made the difficult decision to walk away from him entirely. That is not your decision to make, Evelyn said, her voice rising now. 6 months of carefully controlled grief, finally finding an outlet in genuine anger. Whatever pain I carried after leaving Blackthorn Manor was mine alone to bear, mine alone to work through, and mine alone to decide how to resolve. You had no right, Gregory, none whatsoever, to decide on my behalf what truths I was and was not permitted to hear. I only wanted what was best for you, Gregory insisted, though his voice had grown noticeably less certain now, the careful mask of concern beginning to slip entirely. Did you? Alistair spoke, for the first time since entering the house, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel beneath its calm surface. Or did you want what was best for your own finances, Mr. Ashworth? I understand Lord Whitmore's fortune would have gone some considerable way toward resolving certain debts currently troubling your estate. Gregory's face paled visibly, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, the silence itself confirming everything Evelyn had already suspected, but had still, some small part of her, hoped might prove untrue. How dare you, Gregory finally managed, though the words carried none of their intended force, weakened considerably by the guilt now written plainly across his features. You come into my home at this hour, making wild accusations. They are not wild accusations, Evelyn cut in. They are the truth, Gregory, and we both know it. You intercepted 7 letters meant for me. You allowed me to believe, for 6 long months, that Alistair had betrayed me, when the entire time you knew the true reason behind his silence that night, or at the very least, that the night at Centerferin. You knew enough to understand that his explanation deserved to reach my ears, rather than remain hidden in a drawer somewhere in this house. Gregory sank slowly onto the bottom step of the staircase, all remaining defiance draining from his posture, replaced instead by something closer to defeat. I never meant for it to go on this long, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper now. The first letter, I intercepted almost without thinking, some instinct to protect you from further pain. But then Lord Whitmore began courting you in earnest, and I saw an opportunity, Evelyn, an opportunity to secure both your future and mine. And I told myself that keeping the remaining letters from you was simply ensuring that opportunity was not disrupted by false hope. False hope, Evelyn repeated bitterly. You call the truth false hope, Gregory? You call Alistair's honest explanation for his silence nothing more than an inconvenience standing between you and Lord Whitmore's fortune? I am sorry, Gregory said, and to his credit, he did sound genuinely regretful now, though whether that regret stemmed from true remorse, or simply from having been caught, Evelyn found she could no longer easily tell. I let my own difficulties cloud my judgment where your happiness was concerned, and I see now how deeply that has wronged you. I did not intend such lasting harm, Evelyn. I truly did not. Intent matters little when the harm has already been done, Evelyn said quietly, some of her earlier fire beginning to settle now into something more tired, more sorrowful than angry. 6 months, Gregory. 6 months I spent believing the worst of a man who had done nothing to deserve it, all because you decided my happiness mattered less than your own financial convenience. Alistair stepped forward slightly, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. I will not pursue any formal action against you, Mr. Ashworth, provided you agree to certain conditions. First, you will write directly to Lord Whitmore, informing him that any arrangement discussed between your families is now permanently dissolved. Second, you will never again interfere in any correspondence intended for your cousin, under any circumstances, for as long as you both shall live. And third, you will offer Evelyn a full and sincere apology, not for having been discovered, but for the genuine harm your actions have caused her these past 6 months. Gregory nodded slowly, defeated entirely now, any trace of his earlier bravado long since vanished. I understand, he said quietly, and I am sorry, Evelyn, truly. I hope, in time, you might find it in yourself to forgive me, even if I do not entirely deserve it. Evelyn studied her cousin for a long moment, old affection and fresh betrayal warring visibly behind her eyes. I do not know yet whether I can forgive you, she said honestly, but I will not seek to ruin you, Gregory, whatever pain you have caused me. I will simply ask that you keep your distance from my life going forward, until such time as I decide otherwise. With nothing more to be said, Evelyn turned and walked back toward the front door, Alistair following close behind her, leaving Gregory sitting alone on the staircase in the dim light of the entrance hall, the full weight of his own choices finally settling upon him in a way it clearly never had before. Outside, the rain had finally stopped entirely, the clouds beginning to break apart overhead, revealing thin slivers of moonlight scattered across the wet cobblestones. Evelyn stood for a moment on the front step, breathing deeply, letting the cool night air clear some of the tension still coiled tightly within her chest. Are you well? Alistair asked quietly, standing close beside her, though careful still not to close the distance between them entirely. I do not know, she admitted honestly. I feel as though I have lost something tonight. Some version of my cousin I believed existed, even as I have gained something else in its place. The truth, I suppose, painful as it is. The truth is rarely painless, Alistair said softly, but I have always believed it is worth the cost, in the end. Better to know exactly where one stands, however difficult that knowledge may be, than to build a life atop a lie one does not even know is there. Evelyn looked up at him then, the moonlight catching the sharp lines of his face, softening them somehow, making him look less like the cold duke the county so loved to gossip about, and more like the man she remembered falling in love with, slowly and carefully, over the course of a single unforgettable season. Take me home, she said quietly, not to your manor, my own home, tonight. I need time to think through everything that has happened, Alistair, before I can decide what comes next between us. Of course, he said, without any trace of disappointment in his voice, only continued patience, steady and unwavering. Whatever you need, Evelyn, I have already told you. I am willing to wait however long it takes. As the carriage carried them slowly through the quiet, rain-washed streets toward her family's townhouse, Evelyn found herself watching Alistair in the dim lantern light, and studying the man who had sealed his own front door rather than let her leave without hearing the truth, who had waited 6 months writing letters he feared might never be read, who had stood beside her tonight as she confronted a betrayal far closer to home than either of them had expected. Whatever she decided in the days ahead, she thought quietly, watching the city pass by outside the carriage window, she no longer believed that decision would be made from anger, or hurt pride, or 6 months of misunderstanding. For the first time since that terrible night at Blackthorn Manor, she believed it might finally be made from the truth. 3 days passed before Evelyn saw Alistair again. She spent that time mostly alone in her room, the 7 letters spread across her writing desk, reading and rereading them, until she had nearly memorized every word. She thought often of Grace's trembling confession, of Gregory's defeated silence on the staircase, of the way Alistair had stood beside her through it all, without once trying to press his own case, without once asking for forgiveness he had not yet fully earned. She thought too of Charlotte, the sister she had never known existed, hidden away for years by a father too proud and too cruel to acknowledge her, now finally living openly under her brother's protection. Evelyn found herself wondering what kind of man chose, when given every opportunity to simply continue his father's silence, to instead bring a hidden sister into the light, to risk his own reputation for the sake of doing what was right, rather than what was easy. It was not the portrait of the cold Duke that London society so loved to whisper about at every ball and dinner party. On the 4th morning, a letter arrived, though this one came directly into her own hands, with no cousin standing between her and the truth any longer. She recognized Alistair's handwriting immediately, careful and precise, though the words themselves carried none of the desperation of his earlier letters, only quiet patience. "I will not press you for an answer, Evelyn. I only wish to tell you that Charlotte has asked to meet you, if you are willing. She has heard so much about you these past months, and I believe she would value the chance to know you, regardless of what you and I ultimately decide about our own future. There is no obligation attached to this invitation. Simply an open door, should you choose to walk through it." Evelyn read the letter 3 times before finally setting it down, something warm and unexpected blooming in her chest at the thought of meeting the sister Alistair had protected so fiercely, the sister whose safety had cost them both 6 months of unnecessary heartbreak, yet who had never once been the villain of this story, only another victim of circumstances entirely beyond her control. She wrote back that same afternoon, agreeing to visit Blackthorn Manor the following day, this time by her own choice, with no locked doors required to keep her there. Charlotte Vane turned out to be nothing like Evelyn had imagined. Where Alistair carried himself with careful, controlled composure, his sister was warm and open, quick to smile, her dark eyes carrying none of the guarded caution that so often marked her brother's expression. She greeted Evelyn with genuine enthusiasm, taking both her hands immediately upon their introduction in the Manor's sunlit drawing room. "I have wanted to meet you for so long," Charlotte said, her voice bright despite the obvious weight of everything that had happened between Evelyn and her brother. "Alistair spoke of you constantly, before everything went wrong. I confess I felt rather responsible, once I understood what had happened, though he always insisted the fault lay entirely with him, never with me." "The fault lay with my cousin," Evelyn said gently, settling into the chair Charlotte offered her, near the tall windows overlooking the Manor's gardens, now bright with late afternoon sunlight, after days of steady rain. "Neither you nor your brother did anything wrong in trying to protect you from Edmund Price's threats. I understand that now, even if it took me rather longer than it should have to reach that understanding." Charlotte's expression softened with obvious relief. "Alistair has carried a great deal of guilt these past months, believing that his choice to protect my secret cost him his own happiness. I am glad you do not blame him for that choice, even now." "I do not," Evelyn said honestly, surprising herself slightly with how easily the words came. "Though I confess, I still struggle somewhat with his silence that morning, when I asked him directly what had happened, and he offered me nothing at all in return. That," Charlotte said with a small, knowing smile, "is simply Alistair's particular curse. He has spent his entire life believing that vulnerability is a weakness he cannot afford to show, not after watching our father destroy our mother's memory through cruelty and cold ambition. He builds walls instinctively, even around the people he loves most deeply. I have watched him do it my entire life, though I do not think he fully realizes he is doing it, even now. Evelyn considered this quietly, watching the gardens beyond the window, where a gentle breeze moved through late summer roses, still clinging to their final blooms, before autumn arrived in earnest. He told me something similar himself, the night I came to return his ring, that he built his coldness deliberately, to protect himself from ever being as vulnerable as your father's cruelty once left him. And has that understanding changed how you feel toward him? Charlotte asked gently. No judgment in her voice, only genuine curiosity. I do not know yet, Evelyn admitted. I believe I understand him better now than I ever did during our courtship, when I mistook his careful reserve for indifference rather than fear. But understanding a person's wounds does not automatically heal the pain those wounds caused, even unintentionally. Charlotte nodded slowly, seeming to consider this with the same thoughtful care her brother so often displayed, though wrapped in a far warmer, gentler manner. That seems wise to me. I would only add this, if you will permit an outside perspective from someone who has watched my brother more closely than perhaps anyone else alive. In the 3 years since our father died, I have never once seen Alistair fight for anything the way he has fought these past 6 months to make things right with you. Not his title, not his estate, not even his relationship with me, difficult as that was to rebuild after years of separation. You, Evelyn, are the first thing he has ever truly allowed himself to want openly, rather than quietly, from behind careful walls. Evelyn's throat tightened unexpectedly at these words, and she found herself blinking back sudden tears she had not anticipated. That is a great deal to consider, she said softly. It is, Charlotte agreed. I do not say it to pressure you toward any particular decision, only to offer you a piece of the truth that perhaps my brother himself has been too proud, or too frightened, to fully articulate on his own behalf. Later that afternoon, as Evelyn prepared to depart, she found Alistair waiting near the front entrance, his expression carefully neutral, though she had grown skilled enough, these past few days, at reading the subtle tension beneath his composed exterior, to recognize the quiet anxiety he was working hard to conceal. How did you find my sister? He asked, walking beside her toward her waiting carriage. Wonderful, Evelyn said honestly, and meant it entirely. Warm and kind, and remarkably perceptive about her own brother, I might add. Something like genuine embarrassment flickered briefly across Alistair's face. I hope she did not say anything too embarrassing on my behalf. Only the truth, Evelyn said, echoing words he himself had used so often over these past several days. Which, I have come to learn, is generally worth hearing, however uncomfortable it may prove. They reached the carriage, and Evelyn paused before climbing inside, turning to face him fully in the warm afternoon light. I am not yet ready to give you an answer, Alistair. Not about us, not about what comes next. But I wanted you to know that I no longer carry the anger I brought with me that first night. Whatever I decide, it will not be decided out of hurt or misunderstanding any longer. That is more than I dared hope for when you first arrived at my door that evening, Alistair said quietly, something like genuine gratitude softening his usually careful features. Take whatever time you need, Evelyn. I meant what I said. I have learned to be patient where you are concerned. She climbed into the carriage, and as it pulled away from Blackthorn Manor, carrying her back toward her own quiet townhouse, and the difficult decision still waiting to be made, Evelyn found herself looking back once, watching Alistair standing alone in the golden afternoon light, tall and still, exactly as he had been the night she arrived to return his ring, though something in his posture now seemed less like careful control and more like quiet, hopeful patience. Perhaps, she thought, those were not so very different from each other after all, when a man had spent his entire life mistaking one for the other. 2 weeks passed before Evelyn returned to Blackthorn Manor again, though this time the invitation came not from Alistair, but from Charlotte herself, who had written asking Evelyn to join them for a quiet supper, insisting the visit carried no particular expectation beyond simple friendship. Evelyn accepted readily, finding that her visits to the manor had become, somewhat to her own surprise, something she looked forward to, rather than something she approached with lingering caution. The evening began pleasantly enough. The three of them gathered around a modest table set near the drawing-room fire, conversation flowing easily between old family stories and Charlotte's gentle teasing of her brother's more serious tendencies. But partway through the meal, one of the household staff entered quietly, informing them that snow had begun falling heavily outside, far earlier in the season than anyone had anticipated, and showing no sign of slowing. By the time supper concluded, the snow had thickened considerably, and Alistair's steward arrived with troubling news. The roads leading away from Blackthorn Manor had already grown treacherous, drifts building quickly across the narrow country lanes, and no sensible driver would risk the journey back to the city until morning at the very earliest. "You will stay here tonight, of course," Alistair said immediately, though there was careful restraint in his voice, none of the presumption she might have expected from a lesser man in similar circumstances. "I will have a room prepared for you at once." Evelyn hesitated only briefly, before nodding her agreement, recognizing the sense in his suggestion, even as some small, wary part of her noted the strange symmetry of the situation, finding herself once again unable to leave this house until circumstances beyond either of their control decided otherwise. "This time, at least, no one has sealed the doors against my will," she said, and was pleased to see the corner of Alistair's mouth lift into something that might almost have been called a smile. "No," he agreed. "This time, the storm has done that work entirely on its own." Charlotte retired early, pleading a headache brought on by the sudden change in weather, though Evelyn suspected, watching the knowing glint in the younger woman's eyes as she said her goodnights, that the headache was perhaps somewhat exaggerated for the sake of leaving her brother and Evelyn alone together by the fire. They sat for a long while in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall thick and silent beyond the drawing-room windows, the fire crackling steadily beside them, casting warm light across the room's dark wood paneling. Evelyn found she did not mind the quiet, did not feel the need to fill every moment with conversation, as she once might have during their earlier courtship, when uncertainty had made silence feel dangerous rather than comfortable. "May I ask you something?" Alistair said finally, breaking the stillness gently. "Of course. Do you still love me, Evelyn? Or has all of this, these past few weeks of truth and explanation, simply been about settling old business between us, closing a chapter properly, before we each move forward separately?" The question hung in the air between them, honest and unguarded, in a way that surprised her, coming from a man so long accustomed to careful reserve. Evelyn considered her answer carefully, unwilling to offer anything less than the same honesty he had shown in asking. "I do not know how to answer that simply," she said slowly. "I know that the anger I carried these past 6 months has faded entirely, now that I understand the truth of what happened. I know that I have come to admire you more deeply these past weeks than I did even during our courtship, watching how you have handled everything, your sister's safety, my cousin's betrayal, all of it, with a kind of steady integrity I did not fully appreciate before. But love, Alistair, real love, requires trust as much as admiration, and I confess I am still learning how to trust again, after everything." "That is fair," he said quietly, and though disappointment flickered briefly across his features, he did not press her further, did not argue, or attempt to convince her otherwise, simply accepted her honesty with the same patience he had shown throughout these past weeks. "May I ask you something in return?" Evelyn said. "Anything? Why did you never simply tell me about Charlotte before that night, long before any of this happened, when we were courting properly, when trust between us should have made such a confession easier, not harder?" Alistair was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire, his expression carrying the same careful vulnerability she had glimpsed only briefly since her arrival that first stormy night. "Fear, I suppose. The same fear that kept me silent that final morning. I told myself I was protecting Charlotte's secret, but the deeper truth is that I was terrified of how you might see me, once you understood the full weight of what my father was capable of, what kind of family I truly came from, beneath the polished title and grand estate. I did not want you to look at me and see the same cruelty that shaped my childhood, even secondhand, through the story of a sister he refused to acknowledge. I would never have judged you for your father's cruelty," Evelyn said softly. "You are not responsible for the choices he made, Alistair, any more than Charlotte is responsible for the circumstances of her birth. I know that now," he said, "though it took losing you to fully understand it. I spent so many years building walls to protect myself from becoming him, from ever showing the kind of coldness he showed my mother, my sister, myself, that I never realized those same walls were preventing me from ever truly letting anyone close enough to love me honestly in return. You saw through some of it during our courtship. I think that frightened me more than anything else ever has." Evelyn watched him carefully, seeing now, more clearly than she ever had before, the full shape of the man sitting across from her, Not the cold Duke society whispered about at every gathering, but a man shaped by cruelty he had never asked for, who had chosen, despite every instinct towards silence and self-protection, to bring his sister into the light, to write 7 letters he feared might never be answered, to seal his own front door, rather than let pride cost him the truth one final time. "I think," she said slowly, "that walls built out of fear can still come down, Alistair, given enough time and enough reason to trust that what waits on the other side is worth the risk of tearing them apart." "And do you believe I am worth that risk?" he asked quietly, his eyes meeting hers directly, carrying none of his usual careful reserve now, only honest, unguarded hope. Evelyn did not answer immediately, instead rising from her chair and crossing the short distance between them, kneeling beside where he sat, so that their eyes remained level with one another. "I believe," she said softly, "that I am beginning to remember why I fell in love with you in the first place. Not the title, not the grand estate, but the man underneath, who protects the people he loves fiercely, even at great personal cost, even when that protection sometimes comes at the price of the very honesty those people need most from him." Alistair reached out slowly, as though giving her every opportunity to pull away should she wish to, and gently took her hand in his own. "I am trying to learn, Evelyn, to choose honesty over silence, even when it frightens me more than anything I have ever faced. I cannot promise I will always succeed perfectly, but I can promise I will keep trying, for as long as you are willing to be patient with me while I learn." Outside, the snow continued falling steadily, blanketing the manor grounds in soft, silent white, while inside, by the warm glow of the fire, something long broken between them had finally, carefully, begun to mend itself back together, piece by fragile piece. "I am willing," Evelyn said quietly, "to be patient. If you are willing to keep choosing honesty, even when silence would prove easier." "I am," Alistair said, his voice carrying a quiet certainty that had nothing to do with the careful composure of the cold Duke, and everything to do with the honest, vulnerable heart of the man beneath that title. "For as long as you will have me, Evelyn, I am entirely willing." They remained by the fire long into the night, speaking quietly of smaller things now, ordinary hopes and gentle memories, while the snow fell steadily outside the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor, sealing them in together, not through any locked door or deliberate design, but through nothing more than the simple, undeniable truth that neither of them any longer wished to be anywhere else. The snow cleared within 2 days, and life at Blackthorn Manor settled into a quiet rhythm neither Evelyn nor Alistair had quite dared to hope for only a few weeks earlier. Evelyn visited often now, sometimes to see Charlotte, sometimes simply to walk the manor gardens with Alistair, as the last days of autumn gave way to the crisp beginnings of winter. The careful distance that had once defined their conversations had softened considerably, replaced by an easy familiarity that reminded her, more and more, of the early days of their courtship, before misunderstanding and silence had torn them apart. It was during one such visit, on a bright, cold afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the snowstorm, that Lord Ellis Whitmore arrived unannounced at her family's townhouse, catching Evelyn entirely off guard as she prepared to depart for Blackthorn Manor once again. "Miss Ashworth," he said, bowing formally, as she descended the staircase, to find him waiting in the front hall, his expression carrying a strange mixture of determination and discomfort. "Forgive the intrusion. I would not have come without an invitation, had the matter not seemed rather urgent." Evelyn regarded him carefully, having had little direct contact with Lord Whitmore since learning of Gregory's failed scheme to arrange a marriage between them. He was not an unpleasant man, she had always thought, simply rather dull, more concerned with matters of finance and property than with anything resembling genuine affection. "What brings you here, Lord Whitmore?" she asked, keeping her tone politely neutral. "I have heard troubling rumors," he said carefully, "regarding your continued association with the Duke of Wraithmore. I understand your cousin's earlier arrangement between our families has been dissolved, and I respect that decision entirely. But I confess I find myself concerned for your welfare, given the Duke's rather notorious reputation." "His reputation," Evelyn said, an edge creeping into her voice, despite her best efforts to remain composed, "has been rather thoroughly misunderstood by most of London society, myself included, until quite recently." "Has it?" Lord Whitmore pressed, taking a step closer, his expression earnest, in a way that might have seemed genuine had Evelyn not already learned, through painful experience, how easily earnest expressions could mask far less noble intentions. "Forgive my bluntness, Miss Ashworth, but I have heard whispers that the Duke's own father drove his late wife to an early grave, through cruelty and neglect, and that the current Duke shows worrying signs of the same coldness that defined his father's character. I would hate to see you tie your future to a man capable of such things, whatever charm he may currently be showing you." Evelyn felt anger rising sharply within her, though she forced herself to remain composed, recognizing the careful manipulation woven through Lord Whitmore's words, the same kind of quiet interference her cousin had once attempted, dressed now in slightly different clothing. "Lord Whitmore, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you, it is entirely unnecessary. I know the Duke's history far better than London gossip ever could, and I have found nothing in his character to suggest he is anything like his father." "Perhaps," Lord Whitmore said, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced, "you have simply not yet seen the truth beneath his charm, as I fear your cousin failed to see it as well, before his own scheme collapsed around him." "That is quite enough," Evelyn said firmly, her patience finally reaching its limit. "I understand, you may have hoped for a different outcome regarding our family's arrangement, and I am sorry if that disappointment has led you here today. But I will not stand in my own home and listen to unfounded accusations against a man whose character I have come to know and trust deeply these past several weeks." Lord Whitmore's composure faltered slightly at her firm response, though he recovered quickly, offering one final attempt at persuasion. "I only wish to protect you, Miss Ashworth, from making a decision you might later come to regret. Should you reconsider, my offer remains open, whatever your cousin's failed scheming might have suggested about my own motives." "I will not be reconsidering," Evelyn said clearly, leaving no room for further argument. "Thank you for your visit, Lord Whitmore, but I believe our conversation has reached its natural conclusion." He departed shortly after, visibly frustrated, though maintaining outward civility, and Evelyn found herself standing alone in the front hall, her earlier calm considerably shaken by the unexpected confrontation. She had not anticipated further interference, had believed, perhaps naively, that once Gregory's scheme had been fully exposed, no further obstacles would arise to challenge the fragile trust she and Alistair had spent these past weeks so carefully rebuilding. She arrived at Blackthorn Manor later that afternoon, still visibly troubled, and Alistair noticed immediately, his own expression shifting to concern the moment he saw her face. "What has happened?" he asked, guiding her toward the same drawing room where they had spent so many recent evenings together. She recounted the conversation carefully, watching his expression darken slightly as she described Lord Whitmore's veiled accusations regarding his father's cruelty and his own supposed coldness. When she finished, Alistair was quiet for a long moment, staring into the unlit fireplace, his jaw tight with restrained frustration. "He is not entirely wrong," Alistair said finally, surprising her. "My father was cruel, Evelyn. I have never hidden that truth from you. And I have spent years worrying that his coldness lives somewhere within me as well, however hard I try to resist becoming him." "You are not your father," Evelyn said firmly, reaching for his hand. "I have watched you these past weeks, Alistair. I have seen how gently you treat Charlotte, how patiently you have waited for my trust to rebuild itself, how honestly you have answered every difficult question I have asked of you. Whatever cruelty existed in your father, it did not pass down to you. If anything, watching his example taught you exactly what kind of man you refuse to become." Alistair looked at her then, something raw and grateful flickering behind his careful composure. "Lord Whitmore hoped to use my father's reputation against me, to plant doubt where none needed to exist." "He did," Evelyn agreed. "And for a brief moment, standing in my own front hall, I confess it worked, at least enough to unsettle me. But it did not take long for me to remember everything I have learned about you these past weeks, everything that stands in far greater contrast to your father's cruelty than any old rumor could ever overshadow." "Thank you," Alistair said quietly, "for trusting that, even when someone attempted to use my past against us." "I trust it," Evelyn said, "because I have earned that trust honestly, watching you these past several weeks. Lord Whitmore's words carry no real weight against everything I have witnessed firsthand." Alistair was quiet for a moment longer, then rose from his seat, crossing to the small writing desk near the window, the same desk where he had once retrieved 7 letters that had finally revealed the truth between them. He opened a drawer and withdrew something small, wrapped carefully in soft cloth. I had intended to wait longer before asking this, he said, returning to sit beside her, until I was entirely certain you were ready to hear it. But after today, after Lord Whitmore's attempt to plant doubt between us, I find I no longer wish to wait for some perfect, uncomplicated moment that may never fully arrive. He unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing the same ring Evelyn had once thrown to the floor in anger, then carried for 6 months in a small velvet box, intending only to return it and walk away forever. I am not asking you to answer tonight, Alistair said quietly, holding the ring gently between them. I only wish you to know that whenever you are ready, whenever your trust has fully healed from everything that has happened between us, this ring, and everything it represents, remains yours, should you still want it. Evelyn looked at the ring, then at Alistair's face, carrying none of the cold reserve society so often attributed to him, only honest, patient hope. She thought of Lord Whitmore's attempted manipulation, of Gregory's earlier betrayal, of all the obstacles that had tried, in various ways, to keep her and Alistair apart these past 6 months. None of them, she realized, had succeeded in shaking what had slowly, carefully rebuilt itself between them. Keep it safe, a little longer, she said softly, closing his fingers gently around the ring, rather than accepting it outright. But know that I am closer to being ready than I was even this morning. Before Lord Whitmore's visit reminded me exactly how much I have come to value what we have rebuilt together. Alistair smiled then, real and unguarded, warmth reaching all the way to his eyes, in a way that transformed his entire face. Then I will keep it safe, he said, for however much longer you need. I have grown rather skilled at patience, after all, where you are concerned. Winter settled fully over the county in the weeks that followed, transforming Blackthorn Manor's gardens into a quiet landscape of frost and bare branches, though the house itself remained as warm as ever, filled now with a comfortable familiarity Evelyn had never quite imagined she would find her way back to after that first terrible night. She visited often, sometimes with Charlotte, sometimes alone with Alistair, each visit adding another careful layer to the trust that had once seemed entirely shattered beyond repair. Still, something held her back from giving Alistair the final answer he so patiently continued to await. She could not entirely name it, not at first, though she found herself turning the question over repeatedly during quiet moments alone, trying to understand exactly what still stood between her heart and the certainty she knew Alistair deserved before she accepted his ring a second time. It was Charlotte, unexpectedly, who finally helped her understand. They were walking together through the frosted gardens one crisp December afternoon, Alistair occupied elsewhere with estate business, when Charlotte broached the subject with her usual gentle directness. You still hesitate, she observed, not unkindly. I have watched you these past weeks, Evelyn. You care for my brother deeply. That much is obvious to anyone who spends even a few minutes in your company together. Yet something continues to hold you back from fully committing to him again. Evelyn considered the observation carefully before answering, appreciating, as she so often did, Charlotte's willingness to speak honestly, rather than simply offering comfortable reassurance. I think, she said slowly, working through the thought as she spoke it aloud for the first time, that my hesitation has less to do with Alistair himself, and more to do with my own fear of being wrong again. I trusted my own judgment completely, once, and that judgment led me to believe a lie for 6 entire months. I do not know how to fully trust myself again, let alone trust him, without that same fear lingering somewhere in the background. Charlotte nodded slowly, seeming to understand this more deeply than Evelyn had expected. I felt something similar, you know, after everything with Edmund Price. I trusted him completely, believed every word he told me, right up until the moment he revealed exactly how little he had ever truly cared for me at all. It took me a long while to trust my own judgment again after that, to believe I was capable of recognizing genuine affection from mere manipulation. How did you overcome it? Evelyn asked. I am not entirely certain I have, fully, Charlotte admitted with a small, wry smile. But I have learned, I think, that trust is rarely a single decision made once and never questioned again. It is something rebuilt slowly, choice by choice, day by day, until eventually, the fear grows quieter than the certainty standing beside it. I do not think you need to trust yourself perfectly before accepting my brother's ring, Evelyn. I think you simply need to trust yourself enough to keep choosing him, one day at a time, the same way he has spent these past months choosing honesty with you, one difficult truth at a time. Evelyn walked in thoughtful silence for several minutes after that, turning Charlotte's words over carefully in her mind, feeling something within her begin to settle, slowly, into a clarity she had not quite managed to reach on her own. That evening, after Charlotte had retired, and Evelyn found herself once again seated across from Alistair beside the drawing room fire, she finally understood what had been holding her back these past several weeks, understood it clearly enough to finally give it voice. I have been afraid, she said quietly, watching the firelight flicker across his familiar, careful features. Not of you, Alistair, not really. Afraid of my own judgment. Afraid that if I accept your ring again, and something goes wrong once more, I will have no one to blame but my own foolish heart for trusting too easily a second time. Alistair was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully before responding. I cannot promise you that nothing will ever go wrong between us again, Evelyn. I wish I could offer such a promise, but life rarely allows for guarantees so absolute. What I can promise is that I will never again choose silence over honesty with you, whatever difficulties we face. I have learned that lesson far too painfully to ever forget it. I believe you, Evelyn said softly, and found, saying the words aloud, that she meant them entirely, without the lingering doubt that had shadowed similar declarations these past several weeks. I think that is what I have needed to understand all along, not certainty that nothing will ever go wrong, but certainty that whatever does go wrong, you will choose honesty with me rather than silence, the way you failed to do that first time. Always, Alistair said, his voice carrying quiet, unwavering conviction. I promise you that much, Evelyn, without any hesitation at all. She looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing not the cold Duke London society so loved to gossip about, nor even simply the man who had sealed his own front door months ago, rather than let pride cost him the truth, but the whole of him, flaws and fears and quiet, patient love, all woven together into someone she had, despite every obstacle placed between them, never fully stopped loving. Do you still want me? She asked softly, echoing, without quite realizing it, the very question she had once asked him weeks earlier, in this same room, beside this same fire. After everything, after all the doubt and hesitation I have carried these past months, do you still want to spend your life beside someone who took so long to fully trust you again? Evelyn, Alistair said, his voice carrying a depth of emotion he rarely allowed himself to show so openly. I have wanted nothing else since the moment you first walked through my door to return that ring. Every day since has only strengthened that wanting, rather than diminished it. Your hesitation these past weeks has never once made me doubt whether I wish to spend my life with you. If anything, watching you work so carefully, so honestly, through your own fear, has only deepened my admiration for exactly the kind of woman you are. Something inside Evelyn finally, fully settled at these words, the last remaining shadow of doubt dissolving quietly into certainty. She reached for his hand, holding it firmly within her own, feeling none of the careful hesitation that had marked so many of their recent conversations. Then yes, she said simply, quietly, though the words carried the full weight of everything they had both endured to finally arrive at this moment. I still want you as well, Alistair, completely, and without reservation. I am ready now, truly ready, to accept your ring, should you still wish to offer it. Alistair's breath caught visibly, some careful composure he had maintained throughout their entire conversation, finally breaking apart entirely, replaced by open, unguarded joy that transformed his features completely. Are you certain? He asked softly. I do not wish you to say yes, simply because you believe it is what I hope to hear. I am certain, Evelyn said, and laughed softly, surprising herself with how easily the sound came, how light she suddenly felt after so many weeks of careful, cautious rebuilding. More certain, I think, than I have been about anything, since that terrible night I first stood on your doorstep, ready to end things between us forever. Alistair rose slowly, crossing to the writing desk, where the ring had remained safely tucked away these past several weeks, exactly where he had promised to keep it until she was ready. He returned to kneel before her, the small object catching the firelight as he opened his palm to reveal it once more. Evelyn Ashworth, he said, his voice steady now despite the obvious emotion beneath it. "I loved you honestly from the very beginning, even when I explained myself poorly. I have spent these past months learning to choose honesty over silence, vulnerability over careful walls, and I intend to spend the rest of my life continuing that same choice, every single day, for as long as you will have me beside you. Will you marry me, truly and completely this time, with nothing left unspoken between us?" Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes, though these carried none of the grief that had marked so many tears these past months, only overwhelming joy and quiet, certain relief. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion, but entirely unwavering. "Yes, Alistair, I will marry you." He slid the ring gently onto her finger, exactly where it belonged, exactly where it should have remained all along, had 6 months of misunderstanding never intervened. And as the fire crackled softly beside them, casting warm light across the room where so much had been broken and so carefully, patiently rebuilt, Evelyn finally allowed herself to fully believe that this time, nothing would tear them apart again. News of the engagement spread through London society within days, carried swiftly by the same gossiping circles that had once whispered so freely about the cold Duke's broken betrothal months earlier. This time, however, the whispers carried a different tone entirely, curious rather than cruel, wondering aloud what could have brought Evelyn Ashworth and the Duke of Wraithmore back together after such a public and painful separation. Evelyn found she cared little for the gossip either way. She had spent enough months allowing other people's assumptions to shape her understanding of the truth. She had no intention of allowing society's whispered curiosity to diminish even a small measure of the joy she now carried, freely and openly, for the first time in nearly a year. Gregory sent a formal letter shortly after the engagement was announced, offering his sincere congratulations alongside a genuine, carefully worded apology for everything his interference had cost her. Evelyn read the letter twice, before deciding, finally, to respond with cautious forgiveness, not because she had forgotten what he had done, but because she understood, watching Alistair's own journey toward honesty these past months, that people were capable of growth, given enough time and genuine remorse, to earn back at least a measure of trust. She did not invite Gregory to the wedding. Some wounds, she decided, healed better with distance rather than forced proximity. But she wrote back that she wished him well, and that she hoped, in time, he might learn from this experience exactly how much damage even well-intentioned interference could cause in another person's life. Lord Whitmore, for his part, sent no letter at all, though Evelyn heard through mutual acquaintances that he had quietly redirected his attentions toward a young widow recently arrived from the northern counties, whose fortune, conveniently, proved considerably more substantial than Evelyn's own. She found she felt nothing but quiet relief at this news, grateful that his interference, unlike Gregory's, had never managed to gain any real foothold between herself and Alistair. The wedding took place in early spring, 6 months to the day after that first terrible night, when Evelyn had arrived at Blackthorn Manor, intending only to return a ring and walk away forever. The gardens, so frost-covered and bare during her many winter visits, had burst into full bloom by the time the ceremony took place, roses and early lilies filling the air with soft, sweet fragrance, as guests gathered beneath a clear spring sky. Charlotte stood proudly beside her brother throughout the ceremony, no longer hidden away as some shameful family secret, but fully and openly acknowledged as Alistair's beloved sister. Her own quiet courage in confronting Edmund Price's blackmail scheme finally recognized, rather than buried beneath years of their father's cruel silence. Grace, too, attended, invited personally by Evelyn, as a token of gratitude for the courage it had taken to finally speak the truth, regardless of the risk to her own position. Standing at the altar, watching Alistair's face as she approached, Evelyn thought back over everything that had brought them to this moment. The anger she had carried up those stone steps that first stormy night, the sound of the door sealing shut behind her, which she had once believed the cruelest thing a man could do to a woman, seeking only to end things cleanly, but which she now understood, fully and completely, as the desperate act of a man, determined not to let pride cost him the one person he could not bear to lose. The 7 letters, carefully preserved, each one carrying a truth that had taken far too long to reach her. Grace's trembling confession in that small sitting room near the kitchens. Gregory's defeated silence on his own staircase. finally confronted with the consequences of his own selfish choices. Charlotte's warm, open friendship, offered freely, despite everything her own family history might have taught her about caution and hidden secrets. The snowstorm that had sealed them together, not through any locked door, but through nothing more than simple, undeniable circumstance, giving them the quiet space finally needed to rebuild what had been so carelessly broken. Lord Whitmore's attempted manipulation, which had, in the end, only strengthened rather than weakened the trust she and Alistair had worked so carefully to rebuild. And finally, that quiet December evening beside the fire, when she had finally understood that trust was never a single decision made once and never questioned again, but something chosen freely, day by day, choice by choice, until fear grew quiet enough for certainty to finally take its place. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, and Alistair did, gently, carrying none of the cold reserve society had once so freely attributed to him, only warm, open joy, entirely unguarded, entirely honest. The gathered guests applauded warmly, and somewhere near the back of the small crowd, Evelyn caught sight of Charlotte wiping happy tears from her eyes, while Grace stood nearby, smiling proudly, as though she herself had played some small but essential part in bringing this particular happy ending into being. Perhaps, Evelyn thought, she had. Later that evening, as the wedding celebration continued around them, Evelyn found a quiet moment alone, with Alistair near the same gardens, where Charlotte had once helped her understand her own lingering fear, months earlier during that crisp December walk. The spring air was warm and soft now, filled with the gentle sounds of distant music and laughter drifting from the manor behind them. "Do you remember," Evelyn said softly, "what you said to me that very first night, when you sealed the door and told me I would hear you out before I was permitted to leave?" "I remember every word," Alistair said, smiling gently at the memory. "I remember being terrified, if I am entirely honest, that you would refuse to listen, that you would demand I open the door immediately and never speak to me again." "I very nearly did," Evelyn admitted with a small laugh. "Had you not looked so genuinely desperate for me to understand the truth, I believe I might have insisted on leaving immediately, storm or no storm." "I am endlessly grateful you chose to stay," Alistair said, reaching for her hand, the ring he had once carried in careful safekeeping, now resting permanently where it belonged, alongside the simple gold band they had exchanged only hours earlier. That single choice, to remain and hear the truth, rather than walk away in justified anger, changed everything that followed. "I do not believe I could have found my way back to you otherwise." Evelyn looked up at him, this man who had once seemed so carefully cold and unreadable, who had revealed himself, slowly and honestly, to be someone capable of far deeper warmth and vulnerability than she had ever imagined possible during their earlier, more guarded courtship. "I am grateful too," she said softly. "Grateful that you cared enough to seal that door, rather than simply let me leave believing a lie. Grateful that you chose honesty, even when silence would have proven so much easier." "I promised you honesty, that first night," Alistair said quietly, "and I intend to keep that promise for the rest of our lives together, Evelyn. Whatever difficulties we may face in the years ahead, I will never again choose silence over truth with you. That much, I can promise absolutely. And I promise," Evelyn said, "to keep choosing trust, even when fear whispers otherwise, one day at a time, exactly as your sister once taught me, until certainty grows louder than doubt ever could." They stood together quietly in the soft spring evening, the sound of their wedding celebration continuing warmly behind them, while ahead, the future stretched out clear and hopeful, built not upon secrets or silence, but upon the hard-won, carefully rebuilt foundation of honest, patient love. The cold Duke, London society would soon come to realize, had never truly been cold at all. He had simply been waiting, quietly and patiently, for someone willing to stay long enough to discover the warmth carefully hidden beneath years of protective silence. And Evelyn, standing beside him now as his wife, found she would not have traded a single difficult moment of their journey back to each other. Not the anger, not the tears, not even that first terrible night, when a sealed door had forced her to finally listen to a truth that would, in the end, change both of their lives forever.